I wake up every morning with a terrifying face in my mind. Sleeping is a necessary part of everyone's life. It's what sustains us. Some people like to sleep more than others. Some people dream more than others. No person's sleep experience is identical to another's. But what happens when it's torn away from you by something out of your control? It was a beautiful summer day. I recall it being forecasted at above 30 degrees Celsius, around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty damn good for where I live. The air from the AC in my car was gently caressing my face, washing away the mental grime of that day's work. Concreting isn't an easy job, especially not when you're my age. I didn't plan on doing such physical work at 42, but that's just the way things worked out. I was hoping to do something less strenuous, but on the same pay grade. But, like I said, things just worked out this way and I couldn't afford to be out of a job for even the smallest portion of time. Supporting 3 beautiful children and the most incredible wife in the world is amazing. But it certainly is financially draining. I looked at the sky while driving down the highway, around 5 or 10 minutes away from my house. As I was glancing at the sky, I noticed that the sky seemed to be a darker shade of blue, almost like a light gray. Over the course of the drive home, I noticed that the sun seemed to have completely disappeared from the sky. It was almost like it was nearing nighttime when it was only 5:15. By the time I'd pulled into my driveway and got out of my car to get a good look at the sky was completely dark. There, hanging in the previously royal blue heavens, was a glowing ring. An eclipse. An unforecasted eclipse. I stood there staring for a while, and noticed something odd. The eclipse wasn't progressing. The moon had reached the center of the sun, and had completely frozen in orbit. I'd assumed that my eyes were playing tricks on me, so I pulled off my sunglasses to get a clearer, though slightly more risky look at it. When I pulled off my sunglasses, I realized that there was something very wrong. 3 holes had made themselves visible on the moon, and were all drastically increasing in circumference. The holes made the shape of the 3 points in an upside-down triangle. Slowly, I could see the light of the sun clawing its way through the newfound cavities of the moon. Several seconds passed, and it was now obvious that the 3 holes had made up the pivotal parts of a face, 2 eyes, and a mouth. The facial expression was completely neutral. After another painstakingly long several seconds of observing the face, which had since stopped growing, I saw something that changed me forever. For a second, just a split second, the face smiled at me. A horrible, evil, angry smile. Something so negative that I could almost feel the force of evil coursing through my veins during the split second that the face had grinned. And, just like that, the holes disappeared. The moon continued orbiting and the eclipse was over. But the worst part was that the face was still etched into my vision. The face still resided in my line of sight, wherever I looked. It was like looking at a light, looking away and still seeing a faint outline of it in your vision. Usually, this indignation dissipates after several seconds. But this was different. It stayed there. It remained until I'd gone to bed that night. I know what you're thinking, and yes, I did tell my wife about what happened. I'm going to keep her name private for her sake. She said that she hadn't seen a face in the sky. She hadn't even seen the eclipse. I knew that it was impossible to miss, but I could tell that she was tired of me bringing it up, so I decided to leave it at that and go to sleep. By the time the lights were out and my household was asleep, I could still see the goddamn face. There was something so terrible about it. It gave me a sick sense of inevitable doom. I don't scare easily. In fact, I'd grown up loving horror. But this woke something inside of me. This was scary. It wasn't the idea that the silhouette was sustaining. It was just the look of the face. I can't describe it to you. I draw it, but I've never been a very gifted artist. Picture the most scary face you can imagine. Hell, if it helps you paint a picture, look up scary face in Google and choose an image to assign to the face while you're reading or listening to this story. When I went to sleep that night, I had terrible dreams. Horrible dreams. Dreams about disease, dreams about death. And worst of all, dreams about my daughters. I don't want to elaborate on what I dreamt of that night. But when I woke up, I audibly screamed. There, in my mind, was the most sinister and petrifying thing I'd ever seen. It was the face. But it was no longer a silhouette. It was a real image. A real face. It had horrible, greasy, jet black hair. And pale, sickly skin. Its eyes were slightly too far apart. The smile was impossibly wide, its rotten gums presenting themselves underneath cracked and chapped lips. And it had a Moroccan blue spider web of veins all over its face. It had too many veins. I knew it was the same face that I'd seen in the eclipse the day before, because that smile was something I'd never forget. But it was in so much more detail. It looked like it was staring right into my soul. Its deep black eyes could tell exactly what I was thinking. In contrast to the face, this wasn't etched into my vision, it was etched into my mind. I don't know how to describe it other than that. Just a loose vision or image in my brain, hanging relatively in my train of thought. I could feel its pain, feel its anger. I could feel its horrible heartbeat within my own head. I pulled the covers off of my body and jumped out of bed. I immediately got in the shower to cleanse myself of whatever had infested my mind. I pulled the temperature gauge to as hot as I could. But it didn't work. I still felt just as violated and scared as I had before. I spent that entire day at work literally shaking. I was so scared. It gave me the same feeling I'd felt when I looked at the face of the sun. I could feel the anger in my body. I felt all of its emotions, like it was one with me. I went out like a light that night. I didn't even process the possibility of seeing that thing again. I woke up that morning literally dripping in sweat. The dreams were worse, more brutal, more personal. And the face, well, it was still in my mind. But something was different. Its eye was completely out of its socket, hanging by a thread of optic nerve. This just amplified the horror I was feeling. It made it so much more scary to see. Just like the previous day, I got out of bed and tried to cleanse myself of this evil. But I just couldn't. I couldn't escape it. I got dressed in my work clothes and headed downstairs. The image still burnt into my brain like a tag on a cow. My daughters were all gathered around the TV, watching cartoons. I remember sincerely envying their lack of problems and exaggerated sense of freedom and childhood wonder, which, in retrospect, is incredibly selfish. I sat down on the couch beside my kids, still trembling with fear, and pulled out my phone. I had one notification. I clicked on it and saw the headline, "Man's eye popped out of its socket by smiling stranger." My heart sank. I couldn't even connect the dots. I didn't even recognize what they meant by smiling stranger at the time. But upon clicking the headline and reading the paragraph, it all made sense. A man in the town was attacked last night by a man who smiled the entire time. 21-year-old was walking home from his college campus and found himself face to face with a man who he described as jet black hair and an eerily wide smile. After several seconds of eye contact, this man is said to have gone straight for the eyes of the victim, successfully pulling his eye completely out of his skull. A bus driver who was returning his bus to a parking yard nearby came across the victim, screaming and writhing on the ground with pain, holding his hand over his eye socket. The bus driver also says he recalls a gaunt man with a weird smile running away from the scene at a strange level of speed. More news to come. I was in shock. There was no way in hell that the two experiences of me seeing the face with its eye popped out and then a strange man with a weird smile popped a random stranger's eye out. There was no way. I spent that entire day doing barely any work. I just couldn't seem to focus. Concreting is a very physical job and requires an enthralled level of concentration and physical ability. But this evil had infested my mind. It was as simple as that. I was dreading going to sleep last night. I didn't think I could handle another round of terrible, painful dreams. And well, if my theory at the time was correct, then something even worse was to happen to a stranger the next morning. And I'd be able to tell before it even hit the media. So far, since I've been writing this, I've been trying to keep my dreams to myself. They're so horrible and scary that I didn't feel comfortable presenting such material on this platform. But I will tell you what I experienced on the third night, for the sake of expressing the situation I was in. I was standing in a room, a long, seemingly endless hallway. In front of me were my 3 beautiful daughters, standing in a line. For some reason, they were all in their school uniform. That's not pertinent to the story, but I just found it odd. They had gorgeous little pigtails. But, as I made my way towards them to embrace them, I smacked my head against something. A layer of glass. There was a thick layer of windows separating me from my children. And then, I noticed something that made my heart tear away from my chest. Behind them was a man. A man with an eerily big smile, jet black hair and eyes that were slightly too far apart. In this moment, I felt true terror. True terror is a type of terror that forever changes you. A kind of inner panic that no one but those who've experienced it can explain. It started far away, but slowly his lanky body walked his way towards my kids. But they didn't seem to notice. They stood there smiling and waving at me like everything was okay. It was when he was maybe 20 feet away that I realized he wasn't human. There was something so wrong with the way he was built. Like he was concentrated hatred attempting poorly to take the shape of a human. I desperately screamed and cried and yelled and pointed behind them to alert them of what was coming. But they took no notice. They didn't look behind them. And then, I felt an invisible force on my head. Something had held it in place so that I was forced to look at what happened next. The man placed one hand on the neck of my eldest, and the other on her head. Then, slowly, with inhuman strength, began tearing her head away from her body. I saw bone splinter and flesh shred. I screamed so loudly that I could feel my own ears ringing. Rip. Her head was torn clean off of her body. Her body stood there limply before falling back on itself. Merely a forgotten shell of what was once my beautiful angel. He repeated this process for all 3 of the kids. I felt pain like I'd never felt before. And the worst part was that I couldn't look away. Once it was over, I felt the force let go of my head and I dropped to the floor. I laid there for an uncertain amount of time. Could have been minutes. Could have been days. I don't know. But eventually, I woke up. I thought it was important to tell you this specific dream because this was the worst one I experienced. I need you to understand the types of seeds that this thing was planting into my head. This is where shit got crazy. I woke up and immediately burst into tears. My wife woke up with a start, shocked to see me crying. She said something that I can't remember, but I shrugged her off and ran to my kids' rooms. It was on my way downstairs that I could see the face in my head, and what I saw was enough to stop me in my tracks. The face was mangled beyond recognition. There were teeth coming out at random places and flesh hanging loosely on many different planes. Bones were in places that they shouldn't have been. I had no idea what was going to cause the next tragedy, but whatever it was, I wasn't going to find out. I walked into my daughter's rooms. They were all sound asleep. I kissed each of them on their forehead, packed a bag, ran back up to my bedroom, hugged my wife in a tight embrace, and left without a word. I'm currently in an inn across the country from my house. I haven't slept for 2 days. In fact, this entire story wouldn't be here without autocorrect on my side. Sleep deprivation certainly decreases spelling ability. But I thought I'd share this with you to tell you that if someone you know has recently died a horrible, gruesome death, then it may be my fault. The same mangled face is still burnt into my brain. I haven't checked my phone or the news, so I haven't been able to see how whoever was his next victim ended up dying. But this story won't have a happy ending, because I'm beginning to feel sleepy.